Concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually just currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, on the other hand, like silver, for example, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 technically, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you had saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, today it would be worth around $28,000. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. You can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door, and what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even a 401k into physical silver rather than having all of your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is subject to hyperinflation. Go to dailyrenegade.com and click on the Cornerstone Assets Metals banner. This is the only company that I personally trust with this kind of thing. Click on that and sign up to get your free silver report today. One of the financial experts will speak with you to find out the best way to protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck, and we have a very special show for you. Tonight, we welcome on hosts of the very popular Blurry Creatures Podcast to talk about one of my favorite subjects of all time, and one that we actually haven't really been able to cover much lately, Bigfoot. So for the first time ever, let's welcome to the show Nate Henry and Luke Rodgers. How are you guys doing?
Good, how are you?
Great. Good to see you, Josh.
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to be here, man. Yeah.
Glad to finally be able to have you on the show. I know that we've been trying to schedule this for a while, and just everybody's schedule's hectic, but finally we're here, and it's all in God's perfect timing. So since it's the first time on the show, we do have a bit of a tradition here. So go ahead, introduce yourselves, tell us about your testimonies, how you came to know Jesus, and how that led to what you do today. Either one of you can go first. Up to you guys.
Sure, I guess I'll go. I remember I grew up in the church. My family was Christians, and I remember being around 10 and asking some harder questions. It's kind of hard because I heard the gospel message probably 100 times at school and at church, but I think I got very serious about it when I was around 10 years old, and I remember praying with my sister. But and I remember just having just a different feeling after that. It just changed, and I became more serious, and I remember talking to a lot of people about it, teachers and things. But yeah, I've been fortunate enough to been in a lot of different Christian groups growing up. Sometimes it felt like I was in a bubble though, because you're submersed in Christian culture. Northern California kid. Grew up in Sacramento, California, and then actually met a bunch of Luke's friends in college, and that was kind of our connection. Luke's grew up pretty close to me, but started a band in college, which kind of like sort of got me out of California and started traveling, meeting other people. But yeah, I'll let Luke go now.
Yeah, I mean, similar, Josh. Like I was raised in the church. If we go all the way back, my folks, my mom was a believer and my dad was not. And there's a great story. I was told on my 21st birthday, which is hilarious. My mom was like, "Do you want to know about how you were conceived?" And this show's going to take a hard right, but essentially, my dad was not a believer. My parents separated their first year of marriage, and I start here because it's a pretty amazing story of how I'm even here. My parents were met in college, and they were managing an apartment complex for a property management company, and all the paperwork started coming in very, very sloppy because my mom had gone home and left my dad the first year, and so the guy that owned the property management company came and found my dad, and he was a wreck, and led him to Christ. And my dad went back and begged for my mom, went to my grandparents' porch and begged for my mom to take him back, and she did. And the story goes that was the night of my conception, which is really awful to think about as a with your parents. But I kind of go there. I kind of go there first because that's the legacy I get in my family, is that God really brought my parents back together and changed my dad's life for the better. And I think a lot of church kids do this. I think I accepted Christ when I was like 4 in church. But my story really is, we moved around a lot as I was a kid. I'm from Chico, California, which is about an hour and a half north of where Nate grew up. Been in Tennessee for 10 years now, so I consider myself a Tennessean. I beat all the other Californians out here. But my story with my faith really became real in high school. I switched schools a bunch. I actually switched high schools. I mean, we moved when I was a kid. We moved around a bunch and moved to Portland, Oregon. My dad went back to school when I was 12, so I did junior high in the first year of high school in Portland. This is before Portland got really wacky, because this is in the 90s, and moved back to Chico, switched high schools, and switching high schools when you're a high school age kid, going from having a friend group to no friend group, and then being a new kid again, and I really wanted to fit in, and I was an athlete, and so that was what I did. My senior year, I had some things happen, right? Some really unfortunate things. God was in, and it sounds funny to almost think about now, but I was a basketball player. That was really my sport. And we never played Nate's team. I wish we had now. We could have some great stories about battling back in the high school days. We never played any teams in SAC, but I got inexplicably cut my senior year after leading us in scoring my junior year from the basketball team. And it kind of shattered me. That was my identity. And, I'd always lived under the umbrella of my parents' faith at that point, but I really kind of hit rock bottom. It sounds funny to think about, but I had kind of developed my whole identity in who I was and what I did and playing sports. And when that was pulled out from under me, which is funny because the assistant coaches came and told me afterwards it's the worst thing they've ever been a part of. The head coach was the one that did this, and he was the one that made this decision apart from from them. And long story short, I was just, I was trying to figure out who I was. And I remember sitting into my bed in my senior year and just saying, God, if you're real, I need something. I just feel, empty. And I honestly feel like God, Jesus gave me a hug that night. I can't explain it except that my senior year, my faith became real, and it changed everything. I lost all my friends, really. I felt like because of, I was no longer playing hoops. That was my thing. And God kind of replaced that with people that were following him. And I really caught fire. It was really a crazy time, man. I went to the Call DC that year. If you remember any of that stuff, Benny Hinn and Lou Engle, but it was supposed to be 1 million kids were going to be on the mall in DC. And as, as hokey as that sounds, and even some of those folks that are there now that were there, it was transformative for me. And, I really found my own faith, and it was real. It was real to me. And, then after college, the first time at college, I took a year off and actually moved to Australia, and I was a YWAMer. So I had this crazy idea at the age of 22 that, I just was pre-med and was going to go to med school, took the MCAT and all these things, and felt like I wasn't sure I wanted to do that, which is, of course, is very much a young person thing to do. But I figured if I took a year and gave it to God, that he would show me what he wanted to do with my life. And so I also figured I wanted to go surf somewhere. So I moved to Australia when I was 22, 23, spent a year doing YWAM in Australia. And God also rocked me there. I saw people get radically healed. I saw people come to Christ. I saw demonized people. It was eye-opening. And I also lived in an orphanage in Thailand for a couple months, which really gave me a heart for for kids, abandoned kids as well, which continues today. I really spend a lot of my time that I have, outside of stuff, working with organizations that work against human trafficking, et cetera. That's really a big part of what I do. But, and then this whole Blurry Creatures journey has been so fascinating. We started out, just asking questions about Bigfoot, and because as we joke, it's the gateway drug, but really it's covertly we're just asking about the weird stuff and how to interpret the things that we call supernatural, or things that these enigmatic experiences that people have, and trying to interpret that all through a biblical worldview. And it's really been we call it a journey podcast. It's really been a journey for me and in my faith as well, understanding and looking to understand the weird parts of the Bible, and talking to theologians and people that have had weird experiences, and then folks like yourself that are working, writing the books, the putting in 10,000 hours on these topics that I feel are so important, in our culture in this day and time. We've walked through some very weird years since 2020, when Nate and I really launched this show, in the middle of all that. And everything from, the narratives that are pushed on you, and understanding that much of what we're told isn't true, to, this last year, the House Oversight Committee in Congress holding court, if you will, on with whistleblowers on the UAP UFO stuff, and we've been sort of fortuitously and also just interestingly enough been in the midst of this as it's happening, and so you can't help but have your faith change. And the people like the Dr. Michael Heisers, and that we had a chance to develop a relationship with before he passed away, guys like him, Doug Van Dorn, Dr. Judd Burton, the Ryan Pittersons, and those people of the world, like L.A. Marzulli, Tim Alberino, those folks getting to have a chance to speak with those folks and really learn, and then also take in a lot of their research and their knowledge has been transformative, at least for me, and I know for Nate as well.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I absolutely share those sentiments too with all those people. It's like, that I grew up in church as well, and I had tough questions that they really couldn't answer. And the very long story short, later on in life, it led me to L.A. Marzulli was like my open door to all this stuff. And then after just studying, getting to know what the research says and all that, and then becoming part of it myself and doing my own research and writing my own books and stuff, it's like, wow, I really found my family here, and it's been like that ever since. And I'm so glad that you guys are part of it. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, or actually I might have mentioned that before we started recording, but you guys have an amazing audience. And what I really want to do is introduce you guys to my audience and my audience to your audience, because they're so similar. And so I went on in prep for this show, I went on the official Blurry Creatures Facebook group and asked your fans what most they'd want me to ask you. And I got an overwhelming response. It was amazing. And we definitely won't be able to get to all of these, but there are a few here that I really want to do. So to start, and I'll just do first names only, just in case, because it is a private group. I don't want to embarrass anybody inadvertently. But Joseph had a really good first couple of questions that I think lays out the foundation. And of course, it's the first question that you asked new guests on your podcast as well. It was the first thing you asked me, and that was fun. So what are your thoughts on Bigfoot? Let's jump right into it. And you both can take it. Whoever wants to take it, whoever wants to go first, go for it.
I think your thoughts on Bigfoot have to evolve. I think that's like what I think Bigfoot is now versus what I thought he was a couple of years ago versus what I thought he was when I got into the topic around 2012, 2010, somewhere in there. At first you think Bigfoot's just this animal, it's just this thing roaming in the woods. It takes a lot of work to convince yourself that it's even out there, that there's evidence. We talk a lot of skeptics listen to our show, and people will say this. And I had a friend that I was talking to the other day that said something interesting, that says our faith, all of our faith is based on eyewitness accounts. And to me, that was just like a simple statement, but it made a lot of sense. Like what we believe is based on eyewitness accounts, that people have seen Christ, people experienced him, and then saw him, a resurrected Christ, and then ascend. So that's a huge part of our faith, is this eyewitness accounts. And yet we're so skeptical about other people's eyewitness accounts to other things. And the reason Bigfoot was the beginning of our show is because it's by far the most reported and seen cryptid creature out there. More people see this specific guy than anything. So to lay the foundation is as you slowly accept that, okay, I don't believe all thousands and thousands of people are lying to me about this creature, but you start to look into the accounts and they're all sort of similar. But eventually the accounts get strange. They start to change. You start to hear other weird stuff, like there's sort of this paranormal things that go along with Bigfoot. We've interviewed several people on our show that this thing's communicated with them telepathically. How does that make sense? Are they lying to us? But these are the stories that a lot of the Bigfoot groups can't handle. They don't want to. They just want to think this is just this remnant ape that has been around and he's just really smart. So is Bigfoot, I think the question I'm asking myself now, is this Bigfoot's origin? Was he supposed to be here on Earth, or was he somewhere else? Was he brought here from somewhere else? Because he's often a very confused creature. It's almost like he doesn't understand where he is, why he's here, or he's confused by human beings. So, they'll have run-ins with humans, and it's almost a strange interaction. And you got to think, like, if Bigfoot's been around a long time, animals have adapted to humans. Usually when animals sees a human, they take off running. They kind of know what humans are. Bigfoot doesn't really act like that. So I not only do I think it's got paranormal abilities, but I wonder if it was conceived here, if it was originally a thing of Earth. And as we've learned on our show, there's a lot of things that come from other places. And that's a hard thing. Some people's paradigms, they especially people who have very specific views about the shape of the earth and other things, they don't want to bring in anything outside of the world into their worldview. But as Luke and I have found on our show, you have to expand your paradigm. Sometimes in the middle of an interview, what the heck? If this person's telling us the truth, then this blows up a lot of my thoughts I have. So every day it evolves. But I wonder if Bigfoot somehow was dropped off on a UFO or something here. I mean, I know it sounds nuts, but now we have our government saying that we don't know what these UFOs are, and whistleblowers coming out, and these stories have been going on for decades about things coming and going. But there's lots of stories with the Sasquatch and seeing strange lights and UFOs, but it's a strange creature. I wonder if I don't know if I think that it's just this ape that sort of survived all these years. I think it seems to be an intelligent creature, and I wonder if it's terrestrial.
That's awesome. How about you, Luke?
I mean, listen, it's funny. Before, when Nate asked me in 2019 if we wanted to start a Bigfoot podcast, or do a podcast on Bigfoot, yeah, I was like, right, yeah, absolutely. I think I started watching Finding Bigfoot somewhere in the early 2010s, right? It's been around since 2011, 12 seasons, and they still haven't found him, which I think is fascinating, right? Like, people will argue that they find new species of animals all the time, which they do, but they're all tiny. So there's this enigma with Bigfoot where it's this large animal, allegedly, that people can't bring in, and as we've gone down this path and delved into this topic, there's just, as Nate said, there's too much weird stuff. The Bigfoot community is divided between folks that think this is a remnant ape and sort of a Gigantopithecus and lives out in the woods and is very elusive. And then, of course, there's the other camp, which they call the woo, right? Which is that there's all these weird things that surround this creature that we can't explain. And I think where I've landed is that there's something very odd about this creature because they can't pull any bodies or bones or anything out of the woods. And there are enough stories, like as Nate said, like mind speak or people having experiences where they kind of get this dematerializing or Bigfoot just disappears in front of them, where there's something that's, I don't know, supernatural or, but interdimensional, if you will, about this creature. And if we look at Einsteinian physics and the Einstein-Rosen bridge idea talk about portals, which is a lot of terminology that just talks about quantum physics and the ability of things to be in our realm and then not in our realm. I think that's kind of where I'm landing here. This is a creature, that may be a chimera, maybe a remnant from the pre-flood, but definitely somehow is able to be in our realm and then not in our realm, which it is fascinating to sort of dive into. And I think I point to a couple things which I think are most interesting. If you talk about the Skinwalker Ranch, story of a portal opening up, and these are ranchers telling the story. This is before it was ever a research place or before it was bought, to be studied. There were cattle ranchers there, and there's a story of a portal or a window opening up, as it would be, above the ranch, and a Bigfoot creature climbing out. And I don't think there's a lot of reasons for a cattle rancher to make stuff up like that. In fact, you look insane now to talk about that. But the idea that these things are here and then not, that there are anecdotal stories surrounding this thing that have to do with UAPs and UFOs, that people have enough stories, hunters, et cetera, of having encounters in the forest where they know it's really not something they've ever seen before, and at the same time sort of dematerializes or disappears. Adds this element of there's something, I believe, supernatural to this creature that allows it to be here in this realm and then not. And that's taken me a long way with 3 years of talking about this and listening to interviews and listening to stories. And as Dr. Michael Heiser famously said on our show, if even one of these stories is true, it breaks the paradigm. And there are too many of these, right, that are for it to be everyone to be lying. And so that's where I land with Bigfoot.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I share a lot of those same views, because I started off just thinking that it was, if it exists, it's just some animal we haven't discovered. But then it's like, how can we discover all these like really, really rare, like species of insects and stuff that should be impossible to find, yet we can't find this big lumbering giant in the forest.
It was leaving footprints and butt prints and breaking trees and all these things, right? Like that's a tough one. And I think that's why we called it the gateway drug, Josh, is like once you start to look into this, you go, man, like what else out there isn't, falls into this space, and how we meant to contextualize this, right? And that's and here we are.
Yeah, and you might have already answered this with that, but this connects with what we're talking about. Jennifer asks, Luke sounds like he starts out the podcast skeptical and then starts believing more as time goes on. I want to know what really hit him to make him a believer in more than just giants. And you might have already answered that, but do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think I tend to sort of skew to being a skeptic still. And I think, I think it's healthy in a lot of ways to, the Bible says to test the spirits. And I think it's to chew the meat and spit out the bones idea. But, I think really diving into the unseen realm stuff with Heiser, and then also, the volume of data really, right, is starting to, when you're talking to people every week that are, you spent the 10,000 hours and are the experts in their field, whether you agree with everything they say or not, because most of the time we don't agree with everything, right? There's a process for kind of taking things in and deciding, where do I want to put this in my box or my paradigm. But I think, between all of the expert interviews and then all of the anecdotal stuff, you can't help but start to be swayed, especially I think when we want to filter everything through the biblical narrative and through a biblical lens, and that's because that's our faith, right? And so the more that I begin to understand and sort of the Genesis 6 paradigm, especially, and the divine counsel stuff in Psalm 82, and just starting to unwrap a lot of those things, 3 years ago, because I really hadn't done a ton of that before the show. It really provided a pathway for a lot of these things to make sense to me. The minute you start to understand that there was an angelic rebellion that involved in the mixing of DNA and species, if you will, right, between humans and the angelic race, And understanding that was the view of ancients all the way up until 300, 400 AD, right? This is what everyone believed until the time of Constantine, and sort of when they wanted to make this a little more palatable for whatever reason. That to me was like, wow, okay, this actually plugs in and makes a lot of these things make sense. And then and then going through and understanding a lot of what is happening, in the reality of a supernatural realm is really allowed these things to make a lot of sense. And so, yeah, I mean, am I fully convinced on everything? Of course not. Am I skeptical of most things? Absolutely. But I think this creates a plausibility, I don't know, Venn diagram, if you will, for a lot of these things to be like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you take in the data and the anecdotal, minus us pulling a body out of the woods, or digging up giant bones in our backyard, etc. There are very, very compelling cases I think would be won in a court of law that these things exist, and this is the actual explanation. And so that's maybe a long answer, but I'm a slow burn, so it's taken me a little while to get here. And and Nate, as he famously talks about before this podcast, he spent 10,000 hours listening to Bigfoot podcasts and remodeling houses, and so he was a bit farther down the road than I was, even though I'd spent 10 years watching Finding Bigfoot. It was just renamed to Looking for Bigfoot because they never find him. So.
Well, that's a really great segue for our next question, because that's something I've wondered a lot about too. Like, where does this fit in with the Bible? And Lisa asks, does the Bible refer to anything that could have been Bigfoot? And she also asks where the most Bigfoot sightings ever occurred. But yeah, that biblical connection I think is really interesting, and a lot of people will usually immediately go to Genesis 6. So what are your guys' opinions on that? Is there a connection between Bigfoot and the Nephilim of Genesis 6? And are there any other places in the Bible, or even extra biblical text or anything that you're aware of, where Bigfoot might fit in?
Some people bring up, like, there's a couple lines in the book of Jasher that talk about, there are these ape-like creatures, but I don't know. I've read that. That could go either way. It could be interpreted a couple different ways. Obviously, the Genesis 6 account, we knew there were like hybrids and chimeras and all kinds of creatures. It seems like the giants are more human. They build things. They have civilizations. They have a language. They sort of do their own thing. And I think that Bigfoot's sort of outside of that. I definitely think that, when you look into like the Ron Moorhead accounts where you have these lights and you have these weird orbs floating through the forest and they have this language. Some people have slowed down Bigfoot's language, and it's almost like they're speaking, 400 times fast, or four times faster than we speak. And I don't know. I mean, I don't really see a lot of biblical connections to Bigfoot. There could be, like we've said, there's a way to connect the dots a little bit with some conjecture of saying, well, there's, we knew there were, according to the ancients, there were, chimeras, which are two different types of beings put together running around. So it could be that there's this human side of Bigfoot, and then there's this primate side of Bigfoot. But I don't know. It seems to be, to me, I don't. I think we all want to believe, especially in the paranormal space, that every single ancient creature that was sort of rumored to exist did. But who knows? Who knows what actually was they were able to pull off? But I think Bigfoot. I don't think there's a lot of specific reference to it, biblically speaking.
I think too, one of the things that's fascinating when you go from anecdotal, right? Like, I mean, obviously Gen 6, all flesh was corrupted, right? So you have this idea that those that fell, the Watchers, were also doing, animalistic experiments in addition to the human ones. So you kind of have that as a predication for perhaps the creation of a chimerical creature like Bigfoot. But what I think is fascinating is when you talk to hunters that see him and they get a Bigfoot in the scope, and a lot of them say they can't pull the trigger because it's too human, which is a really, really interesting and fascinating observation, because the magnitude of pulling in a Bigfoot, and maybe the monetary reward for doing that it seems very enticing, and yet they can't do it. So there's something really, really odd about that, and I don't know that I think we'll just lean on the idea that there was a lot of chimerical creatures that have been reported throughout mythos and history, and Gen 6 talks about all flesh, and I think that's really where we land. But as far as where they're seen the most, that's pretty easy. The Pacific Northwest is the epicenter. It's the apex of the vortex, if you will. Washington State, almost double the amount of accounts in Washington State than the next biggest state, which is, I believe, is California. About 9 sightings per 100,000 people in the state of Washington. So if you want to have an encounter with a big guy, go to Mount Rainier or Mount Baker, or get up there to the PNW and see if you can't trudge around a little bit in Pacific Northwest. Which all that really tells us that Bigfoot doesn't mind the rain, because if you've ever been to Seattle, it rains nonstop. So he's okay with a perpetual drizzle, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it seems like. And so that's what's made me question the origins of this thing, because there are so many sightings where it really just does seem like an animal. It's out in the forest. It's in areas where it can get food and water, things that a physical body would need. But then there's other things, Nate, like you brought up, that it almost makes you think this thing is either from another planet or another dimension. So as far as like origins and just how to classify this thing, and I know we're definitely speculating here, but if you had to guess, what are some of your favorite possibilities? Like, is it earthborn? Is it somehow from another planet, another dimension? Is it just a spiritual creature? Is it part spiritual, part physical? We know that angels, they seem to have access to some type of human body if they want it, at least some type of human compatible body, if and when they want it to exist on our realm. So could it be a spiritual creature and all spiritual creatures have that capability? Is there a such thing as a spiritual animal, or are they all sentient? So lots of possibilities. But what do you guys think, with all your research and all the people that you've talked to? What things speak out to you the most?
Yeah, I think we've spent a lot of time on our show talking about, like, what is a spiritual creature? What does that even mean, right? And I think that we've gone ad nauseum with Tim Alberino about trying to break these things down. Perhaps just technology that these creatures possess allows them to appear transdimensional, right? UFOs can go from they're in our sight, then they're not in our sight. These creatures are in our sight, then they're not in our sight. And we say things like, "Oh, it's interdimensional," but really, we don't really know what we're saying when we talk that way. It's sort of just like, "Oh, they're magic." They can perform magic, but we do know that they were physical enough to mate with humans. Angels were, and there's this whole property of they're building machines. Right? They're people will throw the spiritual sort of explanation on stuff, but it's like, why does a spiritual being that doesn't have any physical nature need a physical craft? It doesn't. Those two things don't really go together very well. So why is Bigfoot leaving dukes in the woods and stealing people's lunch
and thousands of footprints, Nate? Like thousands of footprints. Yeah. There's an absolute physicality to this thing. I think that you have to reckon with all of the woo stuff, right? A spirit doesn't leave footprints, and as you say, doesn't take big dukes in the woods that our friend Ken Walker puts in his freezer. That stuff is odd. Like you have to sort of justify that with the kind of hold all things equal and say what's happening here. And I think you point out the angelic thing, and I think that there's a lot of a lot of predication in the scriptures for angels doing physical things as well, right? Like walking into Sodom, or you have the whole Daniel 9 and 10 of the angel being held up by the Prince of Persia, and you go, okay, how does that work? Because as Nate said, like, if it's just ethereal and spiritual, you don't need to fly around in a craft. You don't need to be leaving footprints. You can kind of appear wherever you want to appear, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the questions that boggle my mind too, and the things that I get really interested in. Because, there are times where, some of the stuff sounds so outlandish, it's difficult to believe. But then it's like, at the same time, when it's somebody who's not even seeking attention, it's like, what are the chances that they just made this up, and like for what reason? And of course, like any field, there are people where it's like, okay, I think he's just kind of trying to make a name for himself, or write a book or something. But I don't think that's the norm. Like, I think that's a very small minority of people who are involved in this thing. And those questions. Those questions are what keep me interested. Well, it's almost time to conclude for the free section here. But before we cut to members only, where can people find your podcast and follow you online?
Yeah, you can go to blurrycreatures.com, and that's the hub of what we do. There's a bunch of links there to all the different podcasts. We're slowly building up our YouTube. We've got about a third of our catalog on YouTube right now. And you can we're pretty at Blurry Creatures on social media. We got pretty much all of the handles. And blurrycreatures.com. Somehow we got the .com, and in the in the age of if you come up with a name, you can't get the .com, but it's easy to find us. And if you have Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we're on there as well. It's usually most of our listeners find us on those two places. So appreciate you, Josh, for having us on and talking to your listeners and fans, and thanks for having an open mind. And as you know, we're 4 years into this, so some of our ideas have evolved. So I know for the first time you listen to some guys talk about these things, think these guys are nuts, but we've heard from hundreds of experts and people who've had experiences on the ground, bizarre experiences. We usually only bring people on a show that have had the wild of the wild, and you just have to open your mind a little bit, because there's a lot we don't know, and we don't get a lot of information, we're limited in what we know about the cosmos and the universe, and we try to fill it in with as much as we can through the biblical lens. But a lot of what we hear, if these people aren't lying, who knows? So appreciate it.
Yeah. I was like, find us on MySpace. Maybe you'll get in Nate's top 7, and make sure you find us on Friendster as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, those accounts are probably more rare than Bigfoot nowadays.
Oh yeah.
But we do still have some things to talk about, so we're going to have that in the members only section, as we're all out of time for the free part of the interview for today. But for those watching at home, if you haven't had a chance to yet, head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership. It is only $10 a month or $100 a year, and if you can, I suggest doing the $100 a year, because it's actually cheaper in the long run. Essentially, you get 2 months free. You'll also get access to all of our full video stuff that we just cannot put on YouTube because they censor us, and this is why we had to do the whole dailyrenegade.com thing. And now you even get early access to videos, many times a full week in advance. So people who are viewing this now, this was available a week ago. So you want to make sure that you get that. There's lots of perks for being a member. That is dailyrenegade.com. If you are a member and are watching on the website, you don't have to do anything. Just hold on the line. We're going to continue our conversation. And to everyone else watching for free on YouTube, Rumble, or elsewhere, thank you so much, and we will see you next time. All right, members only. Let's get right back into this. This is such a fun discussion. What I like too about your audience is you have a lot of people here who have asked things kind of more of a personal nature, and some of these questions, it's like, okay, there's a story behind that, and I'm curious about it, and so I wanted to bring some of those into the members only section, because this section of the video doesn't get shared over social media. I don't ever take clips from the members only section and put it out on TikTok or anything like that. So feel free to talk about whatever you'd like. And if there is a question that comes up that you don't want to that you don't want to hit, that's totally fine. One of the ones that really stuck out, and again, if you don't want to answer, that's fine. I don't know the backstory of this, and my audience doesn't either. So Jonathan asks, I'm betting they won't say publicly, see why that immediately piqued my interest, but do they really 100% believe everything that Roger S. Saker, he didn't know the exact last name, from Minnesota claimed in his 2 episodes? All right, I have no idea anything about this, so for our audience, if you want, and you don't have to answer, but if you want to give like a background and possibly address Jonathan's question, who's Robert Saker, or what did he say? What are these episodes about, and what do you think about him?
Yeah, so Roger came on our show and told some wild. Some wild stories of, he had like an energy collector, he said, on his farm. There was a serpent mound on his farm, and he said all these cryptid creatures were like drawn to it. So it was like a magnet for blurry stuff. Bigfoot, Dogman, these giant crocodile creatures. He had a lot of wild stuff to say. And he did dig up some giant skeletons and had, a History Channel show come out and document his land. So there's a lot of verified parts of his story, right? So he came on and did a 2-parter and talked about just this battle that went on with these creatures that were in his backyard. And then he said there's Bigfoot in his barn, and there's 3 of them.
That's my favorite, and dude. They braid his horse's hair, and he plays a Native American flute music.
A witness to him as well. He definitely told him about the gospel. So I thought that was interesting. I believe that Roger believes that these things happened. I've talked to him many times on the phone since, and I don't think he's making it up for, because he was really reluctant to come on our show. It's usually he vetted me pretty hard before he wanted to come on. He called me several times. He was like, what's your angle? Let me listen to your show first. Are you guys legit? Are you not legit? So I don't, when people do that, you wonder, like, okay, what's this guy? He's probably been put through the grinder. He was a railroad worker. He was just like, the turned farmer. I don't see a lot of reason why he would say the things he would say but he might, like we found out on our show, like some of these guys, they experience so like almost a different world than the rest of us. And it's easy on the outside to go, oh man, they're just making all this stuff up. But I mean, his story isn't as wild as some of the other stuff we've heard. Some of the people who come on and talk about satanic ritual abuse sounds like they've been through experiences that blow Rodgers out of the water. But I don't know. I don't know about the giant crocodiles, because I'm not sure.
Boar crocs, Nate. Boar crocs.
But he definitely had, the boar crocs. He had UFO activity that he documented. He had a lot of friends who experienced it. He did have this serpent mound on his property. He said he saw Dogman in his driveway trying to harass him. But we've heard all these other accounts that these things, all these other creatures, people have had run-ins with them. So I'm not really sure what the most wild part of his story is that people have a hard time believing. Maybe it is those giant crocodiles. And I just say that for people who don't know what a boar croc is.
Thank you, Nate.
That's what he called them.
Yeah.
But that's basically what they were. So, it was a wild story. If you want to go back and listen to that, I think it's in the 40s somewhere on ours. It's called I Dug Up Giant Bones. You can listen to that episode. At first, we're just talking about him digging up giant skeletons, which is what Luke and I thought that the episode was going to be about. Like, hey, I got giant skeletons. They're buried on my farm. I'm digging them up. University of Minnesota comes over. We did a whole episode on the weirdness of that. And then at the end, he casually drops, oh, by the way, Bigfoot lived in my barn. And
Nate, I think didn't we forget to ask him about his thoughts on Bigfoot? And so we did it at the end, and he goes, well, they came to my barn. Yeah. And we're like, did it at the end. And it just like the whole episode went a whole nother direction. It just took a right turn, a hard right.
Yeah. Yeah. It went from like basically someone ate some mushrooms and it got real weird,
But I think Nate, you make a good good point though, dude. Like I can't it's hard to find a reason that Roger would be lying or making this up. There isn't a good one. Like the guy doesn't even really have a computer. Like we did it on a phone call, like on a landline, and he was very apprehensive to come on and try to vet us. And it's just like, what's the motivation here to, to sort of make all this up, or he's not someone who you would think that would want to troll us or would do this for recognition, because he doesn't want any recognition. So that part is hard to justify with the sort of the fantastical aspects of his story. Is like, what's the motivation here? He just seemed like an old Minnesota farmer who just had this friggin' wild experiences, and and has Bigfoot friends, which then it's hard. It's a little bit tough to palate all that and be like, but at the same time, I don't know how you find a motivation for someone for him in this case to be fabricating a bunch of this stuff. It just doesn't. He's not writing a book. He's not doing a doc. He's not trying to get some social clout. He doesn't have any of that. So, I don't know. I think Nate said he 100% believes that all this is happening, and it has happened on his property, and he's had these encounters. And so the best we can do is take him at face value and again say, hey, this is his experience. And so, take it or leave it, or take some of it and leave it. It's really, that's where we kind of hand it to the audience.
Yeah, and I love that you guys have an open mind with that kind of stuff too. And because, of course, the initial reaction most people have is to just want to throw it all out. But sometimes I wonder if some of this is spiritual deception stuff. Sometimes I wonder if spirits, like demons, fallen angels, whatever, if they do that on purpose, knowing that that's going to sound crazy to other people, just to target one individual. Like, for whatever reason, like, I see it in movies and shows and stuff, usually in comedies, where, there will be a scene where they blindfold a guy, take him to a secret meeting, and then you have, like Black Hitler making an omelet or something, and they're like, oh, yeah, we put him there so when you tell the story, no one will believe you. Sometimes I wonder if the spirit world does that to individuals just to mess with them, just to destroy their credibility. I mean, we know that, especially if they're Christians. I mean, demons attack Christians all the time. And because there have been times where, like, I read a lot of these stories, and it's always the same. Like, whenever there's some kind of encounter, especially if it's like with aliens or with people from the future sending computer messages through, there's like stories about that. The supposed source doesn't ever prove themselves. They offer no proof. And usually when they communicate with the human, it is the most enigmatic, you can't make any sense out of it. It's, and I've wondered before, do they do that on purpose to kind of try to drive us crazy? So we'll go and research and obsess over it and start like obsessing sometimes over some of these things. Not that they're not real, but that it shifts our focus. Because I had a really good friend named Brenton Saw, and he passed away a few years ago. But he had a channel called Mysteries to Search, and he did similar things to what you guys do. He would have guests on to talk about their supernatural experiences, and one of them, it was sort of like an alien abduction thing, but it was with these weird creatures with these like elephant trunks, and they told the guy. They said that they come from a forest named Whitaker, and which, of course, everybody's thinking the actor when they hear that. When I heard that, because I've had sleep paralysis my whole life, and I'm telling you, I have like heard demons say weird stuff like that. I don't think they're even trying to communicate. I think they're just trying to confuse and just mess with people. Because what that guy did after he came out of that experience, he started researching Forrest Whitaker, where his family comes from, what the name means. I mean, he got all into it. And when I was talking to Brenton about this guy, I was like, I bet you that was the goal, to distract him away from, the gospel or whatever, and to focus on this just random thing. I was like, they were lying to him. They were just making something up, probably just to get him obsessed. And I wonder how often with some of these stories, I believe people do have real experiences, but I wonder how often we're interpreting them. And when I hear things like that, it's like, you know what? I bet he probably did see everything he thought he saw. But I would not be surprised whatsoever, because there are lying spirits if the whole thing was just staged just to drive him crazy or make him lose credibility. I mean, there are people that lose their entire families over this kind of stuff. So sometimes I wonder. I don't think that's the case in every case, but sometimes I wonder if they do that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that we talk about a lot is trying to convince Christians that, not convince Christians, but try to help Christians, open their mind, because some people just say, oh, it's all spiritual. The whole UFO phenomenon, aliens, it's all a spiritual deception. And I push back a little bit just in conversations with friends and on the show that, like, okay, well then why are we finding metal pieces in the, why do people email us and say, hey, my dad had, had seen part of the Roswell crash and had pieces of it. L.A. Marzulli saying that he went there to the crash site and they're finding metal. You have, and that's just one story. That's just the Roswell crash. So they have, I don't know how many demons are sitting around in the desert for hundreds of years, transformed into a piece of metal, right?
Right, right. Yeah, there's some physicality to it for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, we know that, like, spiritual, like spirits, the root of spiritual is spirit. We know that there are spirits, but usually they need access to a physical body, or they're not operating the same as a physical, like a giant would, or an animal would, or a human would. And I would argue a lot. It seems that angels have a body too. I think that they do. I think angels have a body. I think we think that they're shape-shifting genies, and I wonder if they're just kind of like we are, but a lot of people have encounters with these tall blonde beings that are not. They look human, but they're not human.
Yeah, Paul says there's celestial flesh as well as physical flesh.
Yeah, and Jesus' resurrected body is a lot like his old body. So, he still had a body. He could still look at his hands, and they were still trying to figure out who is this guy. But he
can also walk through walls too.
Pal Jesus.
Yeah, I mean that's I mean, that wild, right? I mean,
yeah. So I would, I would push back and say all these things that, it's not just a spiritual deception, that there is things going on, like the missing 411 phenomena. Yeah. If it's a deception, then why do they go through so much effort to not be noticed or seen, or it's behind the scenes? It seems like there's an abduction program going on. They don't want people to know it's happening. They don't want to have attention to it. Usually when there's a deception, it's right out in the market square. Everyone sees it. Everyone knows it. Everyone believes it. It's like, okay, we're all on board with this giant lie because it's so good. And yet a lot of the topics that we talk about remain hidden. Like David Paulides came on our show and talked about elk. These craft in the woods in the middle of nowhere taking elk. Yeah. Like, it's bizarre. Like, maybe a couple construction workers saw this happen, right? And they come on and they swear like this is happening. But then we hear about cattle mutilations, which is sort of the same thing. And they have these laser cuts on them. There's no blood in them. It's just bizarre. And yet farmers are still debating with each other like, hey, this doesn't seem like a joke. This isn't a practical joke. There's nobody that can do what I'm looking at. We're trying to get a guy to come on the show who's been raising cattle for years and had this happen to him, but he doesn't want to come on the show because he's, doesn't want to open up that can of worms. But he said definitely whatever happened to my cattle was not anything I've ever experienced or seen before. Laser cut. It's like something was removing parts of the cow. So I push back on the spiritual deception of some of these things, like sure. Because they seem to be up to some sort of scientific experiment. They know what they're doing. They're going about it, and they don't want humans to know what they're up to. And that doesn't really gel well with this whole deception narrative, because I'm like, maybe some of it is. Maybe some of it is smoke and mirrors. But I think a majority of it is they have a a bigger idea, a bigger plan, and they don't want us to believe it exists and then have any evidence for it or any video footage of it. Because you can't even, half the time, you can't even film these things. And that's why we call it blurry, because if there was actual physical evidence of these things, then, you know, our show probably wouldn't exist, because you wouldn't need us.
I would add, like,
So
in the
that's
context of Roger, though, like I think there's something to that, Josh, because when we had Fritz Zimmerman on, Nate, and he was talking about all the experiences he had on mounds. Roger has a mound on his property, and he actually believed that that's a serpent with an egg, and the egg itself is like a portal, and things are coming through that. And then talking to Fritz and his experiences on these mounds, which, you know, or supposedly or allegedly or purportedly that there were giants buried in a lot of these mounds. There's something very, very odd and weird that happens with those, and whether they become portals or access points for spiritual stuff. I absolutely can go there with a lot of that, because there's a lot of, I would say Fritz and then Rodgers' experiences provide a lot of data or data points, not a lot of data, but data points for the idea that there's something really odd with these mounds. And, we had Doug Van Dorn on, Doug and Judd, talking about they finding a serpent mound in Bashan. And these things are super ancient. So whatever they were doing with these mounds, I do think there are access points within these for, what you want to call it, a portal, you want to call it a window, you want to call it a foothold, whatever sort of vernacular you want to use when you talk about supernatural stuff and spiritual stuff. I think that you can go there with some of the mound stuff. But I, as Nate said, I do think there's this other side of the coin where there's definitely a physicality, and I think that goes back to Gen 6, right? You have these giants for definitely physical. They're eating people. They're destroying the earth. They were killing, and these were physical beings. And their fathers were angels that somehow or another were able to reproduce with women. And I think those are things, if you want to reverse engineer, there's a thought process there that you can land on physicality. As you said, Paul talks about celestial flesh, and I think the idea of the resurrected Christ is also very interesting. And I think what we're trying to do is in some ways break people's paradigms from the medieval thinking. You know, we had a Catholic priest on our show who was an exorcist, and his paradigm was that he was always casting out the devil, and everything's ethereal, and the demons and angels just could appear wherever. But when you open up Scripture and you look at the biblical accounts and narrative, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, Jacob doesn't wrestle with a spirit. The spirit doesn't hurt his hip. He wrestles with a physical angel all night. And a physical angel, the angel of the Lord, comes and eats with Abraham. And the angels walk into Sodom. And these are things that are tough to sort of justify with this idea of like a poof theory and this ethereal theory. And that's really a lot of medieval thinking. And so I think just thinking about asking people to sort of expand their paradigms and think about these things, and from a standpoint of like, how is this really happening? And let's look at the Bible. That should be our source, right? And it can be, and it is. And there's a ton of breadcrumbs there for us to sort of make sense of a lot of this. And the honest truth is, and Nate, I say this all the time, that until you pull a body out of the woods, until we have a specimen here or there that we can analyze, we're looking for better answers. And we're doing that in context of the Scripture, of God's Word. And, when you hold it up to that, I think you can find a lot of very good answers, minus us having the Bigfoot on a table or the alien on a table, which purportedly our government does. I mean, if you believe the whistleblowers and stuff that's going on here in 2023 with the House Oversight Committee, we have non-human biologics. So biologics is another hard part, right? Unless everyone's lying, which is a lot of people will go there. There has to be some sort of reckoning with that, and then also, how does that work? And I think it does. I mean, I absolutely think it does, based upon the examples and evidence we have in the Scriptures. And so that's where I kind of let it land. Better answers, and you know what, and I think, and maybe minus us standing in front of the white throne and asking the Lord for what's really happening. We may not know this side of eternity, but I do think these things allow us to contextualize the stuff that's happening now in our culture, in our world, whether it be UFO disclosure, whether it be people that have that have encounters with cryptids or encounters with creatures, etc. How do you contextualize that? And our faith is big enough to put fences around those experiences and these things, and it fits within a biblical context, and that's really where Nate and I think are trying to explore sort of the mysteries on the fringes.
Yeah.
Yeah, amen, and I'm right there with you. And those are all excellent points. And yeah, it does seem like there's two sides of the same coin here in how to interpret all this. And there probably isn't one solid interpretation that we're ever going to find on this side of eternity. But I think that's the mystery of it can be part of the fun in it too. Is just wondering it could be this, it could be that, knowing someday when we get to stand before God. I know one of the first questions I'm going to ask is what's going on with Bigfoot, personally. And so eventually the mystery will be solved. And right now it just feels like
I wonder if we'll just know. I wonder if we'll just know when we get there. There's like,
well, he's weird too. We didn't touch on this.
Realm.
We didn't touch on this either, Josh. But like, there's a lot of like amicable stories about Bigfoot, like saving kids. And you go like, he's benevolent.
Yeah.
Sometimes this thing's benevolent. And you go, how does that work? You know, I don't know. We'll find out someday.
Yeah, it's probably just like people. Sometimes you run into a good one. Sometimes you run into a bad one. Who knows?
Right on.
Exactly.
I had a couple more here for you before we wrap up. Angela asked, what kind of spiritual warfare have Nate and Luke encountered with certain podcast releases? Example, more weird things happen when exposing SRA, a Dr. Laura episode, or following any Trent episode. So I don't know the background of any of that, so you guys go for it.
Yeah, it's hard to know when you're. I would say I don't know when you're being spiritually attacked. I think that's we do delve into a lot of, but I think that it's easy to think that you're some important soldier in the kingdom of heaven, and oh man, I'm having all these hard times. I don't know. I think there are mental health stuff that seems to come at you. You start to doubt. You start to question. You just feel overwhelmed. I mean, I would say that one of the main things that I went through is when I started this podcast. Just my ex-wife. She just kind of looked at me like I was nuts and left when I started really diving into these topics. So I felt like that could have been years before, building up to that moment, but I definitely think that the podcast was a catalyst for. I felt like I paid the price there, in some ways, of talking about these things and committing myself to it because, you feel like you're going down a path and God's put you on this thing, and obviously Blurry Creatures has become more than a hobby for Luke and I, and she didn't want that, so I feel like my family kind of blew up, and it was hard for me. And there were days when I was like, I don't even know if I have the strength to do this right now. I'm just falling apart. And so I think that we get spiritually attacked in different ways, but I definitely know that was the biggest thing I went through, was just seeing it it was the last straw from my marriage, definitely trying to just committing to doing this thing. And then since then, we've had weird little things happen, but I don't know. It could just be life is hard. Life is crazy. Things happen, So I can't tell you if it's related to the podcast or not, but it definitely feels like Luke and I are some days just trudging through the mud of all of this. And I think the hard thing too, Josh, is people who get into your show can be so mean, they can love you one minute and hate you the next. They can be all in, and then they go, well, you said this thing, or you brought this guest on, or you're this and that. And then they just, in the name of Jesus, they blow you up. And I think that is the hardest part of this show, is that people will turn on you and be nasty, or just say, like, I thought you guys were Christians and stuff like that. You're like, whoa, like 85% of what we do is free. We spend all of our time and energy on this thing. Like, come on, like, just give us a little grace. So I think that's a lot of the spiritual attack, is just like, man, you're a sensitive guy, you have something to say, you put yourself out in the world, and then you just get shotgun blasted by people. And you're like, this isn't easy to take this kind of, and you got to grow up and be a man, and it comes at you, whatever. But that's always hard, no matter who you are. You know, you can't read. We're at the point where we can't read the comments anymore. We just got to keep going. Everyone's an expert. Everyone's smarter than us, and we don't claim to be the smartest. So, not really sure what the argument is, but there's a lot of that. I think it's just a mixture of all those things, getting up, trying to do the podcast, and plowing through life and kids and bills and end of the world and all the links that come at us of this is that, Trump's the savior, Trump's the devil. You get it all, and you're like, what? How do you make sense of? And then all of a sudden, you know, people are, you know, turning on each other in the members pages, and just to stay laser focused on, I got to get an episode out. I got to stay mindful on Christ and try to filter out all the nuts. But also, like, some of those people have really good information. So it's just it's a heck of a balance in the middle of all of that, trying to maintain a cool, calm, collected, and just be like, and humility, like, God, what do you want to do with this show? I think Luke and I have taken it as far as we can take it. What do you want to do? And how do we get out of the way, but also maintain passion for it? Because we want to stay passionate about what we're doing, but we also don't want to, like, let one situation blow it up. You know, one disagreement or one interaction destroy it, because it can happen very quick. I've seen this in creative projects. People, like, are going, and then all of a sudden it just blows up, and you're like, what happened? And then there's all this hate and bitterness. So luckily, Luke and I have been through enough of those situations before the podcast, so we know that 99% of the time that's in your own head. That's your own problem. Sleep on it, and tomorrow there's a new day, and all things are new again. That's a lot to unload, but that's where I think that's the spiritual attack that we all face. Some people have actual, like, dogmen hunting them in the woods, but it's not us, you know. I don't envy those people, but they have those stories, and you're just like, I'm thankful that we don't have actual cryptid creatures showing up in our backyards yet.
Yeah,
who knows?
Did you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, from my standpoint, I think, you know, because, you know, our heart in this, Nate and I's heart, is really to have people encounter the gospel in the midst of all of the weirdness, and be able to sort that out for themselves and encounter Christ, and to provide a space to talk about the weird things, talk about it through a lens that validates our faith, and hope people encounter the gospel. That's really our heart. And so, you know, I think anytime that you are a threat to the kingdom of darkness, you put a target on your back, no matter what you're doing. And so I think, as Nate said, I don't want to find a devil under every rock, and I don't want to over spiritualize everything and say these are all attacks, because Jesus said, if we follow him, things are going to be hard for us. That's out of our master's mouth. It's going to be hard. So you got to balance those two things. But there have been a lot of odd things, I would say, that have happened. You know, Nate spoke about his life, but, you know, we had fires at our house both the same week. Remember that, Nate? Just sort of randomly, we had fires in happen at our house. I mean, I've had a lot of odd things. Happen sort of that don't make a lot of sense in my house. Like, not in my house at all, but, you know, I've had a mass die off of trees in my yard, where we bought our house, and I asked the previous owner how many trees they lost in 17 years, and he said 1. And I'm up of every tree that was perimeter to my house died in the span of a year. Every single one.
Wow.
Had some weird things on our security cams, but you know, I think feel very insulated and protected by the blood of Christ. There's some weird things that happen out there, and I think all that stuff is meant to inspire fear. And I think in some ways, if you flip the coin over, if you're not having resistance, then I think you need to question how much of an impact you're having for the kingdom of God. And so I think if we are walking in that, and we're doing our best, as Nate said, to kind of get out of the way and let God, we really want God to do what he wants to do with this show, and not have Nate and Luke get in the way. And be the best, and approach it with humility and try to do right by all people that we encounter in this space. But it's you're gonna have some resistance, and there's maybe a badge of honor in being like, maybe we are becoming a threat to the darkness, and so that's why they're interested in trying to throw us off. But walking in the authority and the power and the blood of Christ, and knowing that Jesus promised things would be hard. I think that's where you got to kind of balance all those things. Because a lot of people will over spiritualize everything and say, my car broke down and X, Y, Z, and that's because spiritual warfare. And maybe it is. I mean, you can't say that's not, but I do know that cars break down. I do know that trees die. Yeah. But perhaps the volume at which things happen maybe is not coincidental. But man, like I tell you what a privilege to be able to do this. It's an absolute privilege because to get one or two emails a week that say, people, this is what listening to your show brought me back to my faith, or listening to your show I brought me to Christ, and you go, man, Nate and I did never start this thinking there would be anything but fun and talking about Bigfoot. So what an honor, and also what a responsibility. And I think we try to weigh that out and say, man, we just want to do whatever makes the name of Jesus famous, and whatever brings glory to God in our weird little 80s cryptid Bigfoot corner of the internet. That's really our heart.
Amen. I love it. I completely agree with you guys. I mean, that perfectly sums up, what it's like doing the kinds of things that we do. And I mean, you just said it perfectly. And I can't think of a better note to end on than that. That's absolutely fantastic. Well, guys, this has been so much fun. I hope this is the first of many interviews coming in the future. This has been an absolute blast. And of course, for the audience, we have only just, to say we even scratched the surface would be an overstatement. Blurry Creatures, they have so much content, really good information, a lot of great podcasts. You need to check them out, blurrycreatures.com. Check them out on Facebook as well. Nate, Luke, thank you guys so much for spending time with me today and with the Daily Renegade audience. We're going to have you both back on again sometime soon.
That's great, Josh. Looking forward to having you on Blurry. We've got to get on the calendar for that. So we'll see you in the Blurryverse here very soon. Yes, sir.
Excellent. Sounds good. I'm very much looking forward to it. Well, thank you guys again, and thank all of you at home for joining us. And thank you so much for being members and supporting what we do here at Daily Renegade. Until next time, love you all. Take care, and God bless.